Hello again, friends. And you are our friends. And welcome back to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru right here, wherever it is that you've pulled up to this week. And good morning to you. Or good afternoon. Perhaps good evening. Anytime, day or night, the cult of Cornette can listen to the Drive-Thru wherever it is that you are. And you know how it works. You send in your questions on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru or via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com. And they get answered by the man I'm about to speak to. I'm your host, the great Brian Last. And the man answering your questions is the road warrior himself. He's busted up more hotels than Keith Moon, Mr. Jim Cornette.
Hello. Now that's the way you do a fucking introduction, folks. That's the way you do. Brian, you've outdone yourself because you had pep. You got me up. Because I'm kind of grumpy in the mornings as opposed to the afternoons and evenings when I'm cranky and snarky. But you got me up. You got me excited, ready to do the show, much less listen to the show. You included all the Cult of Cornette listeners out there in the group of folks who are indeed our friends. You laid out the premise of the program, and then you brought it home by introducing yourself and, of course, the star of our show, which is you're the host. I'm the star. We get the equal billing.
No, the star of the listener questions. The listeners are the stars.
Well, the listeners are yes, but I'm the whatever the fuck. Don't fuck with it while I'm talking.
You're the specimen.
Do not fuck with it while I'm putting you over. This is rare enough already. But anyway, so you got everything in there and you pitched it off to me and bravo, kudos to you, kind sir. You've started the day off right.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the pat on the back.
And you know, it's only a short distance between a pat on the back and a kick in the ass.
Hey now.
Hey now. Hey now. Hey now. Don't dream it's over. Who was that?
I hate that song. I hate that goddamn song.
I didn't ask for a goddamn critique. I asked for information on the artist. I'm trying.
I don't know. Is it Crowded House? Or
it was
one of those crowded bands.
I thought that was Our House is a very, very. Tony Schiavone used to have that on his fucking, I assume he didn't put it on. I imagine his better half did, but you'd call him and Our House is a very fine house, or whatever that fuck was with
Crosby,
the kids.
Stills, Nash and Young, yes.
No, that's not Crosby. That's some peppy fucking 80s song. You know,
are you talking about Madness?
What? Are you
talking about Madness from England?
What? I don't know who these people are.
Our House?
Is in the middle of the street.
Yes, Madness.
It's a very fine house. It has kids in it and 2 kids in the yard. And
that's not how it goes, no.
Something like that. It was very family. It was creepily family. It's like, here's another thing I hate, just while I'm on the fucking subject. When you're behind one of these fucking pea-brains in one of these vehicles that has a little cartoon stick figure representing everybody in the family, and even the dogs. Actually, when I see 2 or 3 dogs there, I'm like, okay, these people are all right. They're just a little fucking demented. But when you see the happy man and the happy woman with like 5, 6, 7 happy fucking little kids, and then a dog, brother, you need to pull out every once in a while. What the fuck? Your life has been over. And I see, and checking into hotels, just here's another thing. Checking into hotels, I see couples in their late 20s, early 30s that have, there's a baby in the fucking buggy, and there's a baby in the arms, and there's at least 2 kids, toddler size or, under 8, where they can't ride the fucking ride at the thing. That small altogether. I'm thinking, what the fuck? You people have ruined your lives and theirs because they're going to fucking constantly have all the attention divided. And unless you're a goddamn millionaire CEO of a fucking oil corporation, you ain't going to be putting all these kids through fucking college and shit. And meanwhile, you and your lovely wife there, you're in your fucking early 30s and you have had, I'm sure, not nearly enough kinky, freaky shit going on in your life that you're ready to quit now because that's what you've done. Holy fuck. And the noise, they're crying and they're laughing and they're tittling about. Holy shit. So when you see it on the back of the car, I want to just fucking rear end these fucks with Black Beauty. Just what the fuck? So happy about it. Anyway, it's going to be a good day here on the program. Don't you think?
Oh, yeah. I'm still shocked that you don't know your 80s. In America, they were a one-hit wonder.
Well, it was such a simpering fucking song. Just a simpering. I'm sure that should have been Kenny Olivier's fucking entrance music. Because it's just simpering.
What are your least favorite songs?
Well, I don't know. Because I immediately hear it. I go, what the fuck is that shit? And I turn it off. I don't know the fucking name of it. Now, I'll tell you, some of these heavy metal fucks that try to remake rock classics, like whoever tried to do Turn the Page again should be shot, boiled in oil. And some of the fucking country fuckers that try to fucking do rock songs as country, fuck you. And there was the one time when they raped John Lennon anally raped John Lennon. It was some goddamn God Bless America country fucking artist crowd or whatever. They redid Imagine, and they changed the words to, instead of Imagine No Religion, Imagine One Religion. Well, I wonder which one that might be. That would be number 3 in the column of complete bullshit. So they raped John Lennon and performed his classic in public with the exact opposite intent, where he was calling for, imagine if we were all so enlightened that we didn't hate each other and we didn't have all this religious bullshit going on and nonsense to distract ourselves from the fact that we're all in this together. And they turned it around to, imagine if it just was us Christian white people. Fuck you. Why'd you get me started on this? I was cheerful a minute ago.
I don't know how you got here. I really am questioning what happened to the show.
Actually, I was delivered in a hospital is how I got here.
Is that how you got here?
Unlike, mud show wrestlers like Jelly Janela and folks of that ilk, who, when the stork that brought them was arrested for carrying dope.
Well, there are some people born in a hospital and their parents, unfortunately, are addicted to opioids.
Well, but see, you're jumping the segue because I still got a letter here.
All right.
I got a letter. It's some fan mail from a fine Cult of Cornette member who, I'm going to give his first name. He may not want to be quoted, but Andre. And if you do want to be quoted, Andre, email me back and I'll give your last name. And this gentleman, by the way, is
Rosimov.
No, quit. Hey, what would you have brought me if I'd asked for a Bloody Mary? Anyway, so Andre, right? Andre is a professional person. He's very successful. I won't give his profession, but he's not just your ham and egger. He's a fucking highly educated and professional person. He's not just some fucking local yokel from the local Kmart. He's an international yacht broker from Toulon, France, is what I'm trying to say. Hi, Jim, and this is a couple weeks ago, so he's saying last week's show, but it was last month. Hi, Jim. Everything you said on last week's show about the death matches was perfectly stated, with one minor exception addendum that I would really like you to point out one of these days, assuming you agree, because I think it is missed constantly in this death match discussion. When Terry Funk, Cactus Jack, and Terry Bam Bam Gordy were doing death matches, they were doing professional wrestling matches, which were a lot different than the death matches being done by the likes of Ian Rotten and all of the other garbage death match guys out there. Just the other day, I watched the Gordy Cactus Jack death match from Japan, and it was a good pro wrestling match. It had wrestling moves, told a story, had a proper build-up, psychology, and in fact, there really was no blood in it, and it got over. They used a tray of thumbtacks and a barbed wire bat, and they told a very logical story that ended with a huge pop following a power bomb into the tray of tacks. For those of you who like that kind of thing, that's editorial comment. If you really watch it, it was an easy, basic wrestling match built toward a thumbtack spot that gets a huge pop because of how they got there. Nothing about the match seemed fake or unbelievable. Neither Jack nor Gordy survived 10 things that would have hospitalized or killed a normal person in a fight. There was no sense of cooperation. That's probably the most important thing. I know some of the Jack Funk death matches were way more than a tray of tacks, but they constantly stayed true to the concept of realistic fighting and employing pro wrestling moves. My point is, you would never see Funk, Jack, Gordy, etc. doing these things Ian-like wrestlers are doing, using weed whackers and things that would kill people, including sledgehammers. I'm not excluding fake-ass Triple H from this either, that have no place in wrestling. These guys barely use a wrestling hold. You could certainly say the same about barbed wire and thumbtacks having no place in wrestling, but the way it was used to build excitement when Gordy and Jack did it is not comparable to how it is done today. It is comparable to the steel cage matches and other gimmick matches of yesteryear. The CZW, IWA deathmatch guys say they do what they do because their shit is real, but it is true. Dropping your opponent into a foam board of razor blades, whacking him with 50,000 light tubes and setting him on fire only to have him win 45 minutes later with a schoolboy isn't real, it's nonsense, and it's phony. No different than when the Young Bucks make all of their opponents appear invincible and their match is unbelievable by super kicking everyone they quote-unquote fight 30 times in a match only to have them kick out on 2. It has killed wrestling. What Ian Rotten does and what the Young Bucks do to professional wrestling is absolutely the same thing. Deathmatch wrestling and spot fest nonsense wrestling are the same poison to legitimacy and realism. You can blame Funk, Jack, and Gordy for opening the door, but my point is what they did wasn't the same as this current bullshit. And that is true. That because what it's happened is fans that I should use the proper term, marks, because fans are great of wrestling, but marks are idiots. Marks who grew up during that era watching these guys that had the same mentality as a fucking, vacuum head like Vince Russo. All they remember is Roddy Piper hitting Jimmy Snuka over the head with a coconut. Just that. Nothing else. They don't remember how they got there, why anybody cared about them to begin with, what they did 6 months afterwards, whatever, just constant, just spots. And the marks of that grew up and got into the business because they wanted to be hardcore instead of because they wanted to do it as a profession, make money, be professionals, be trained, be good, be talented, work for big companies. They wanted to cut each other up in a fucking barn because they're mentally deficient. If you look the word mentally deficient in the dictionary up, you will see a picture of Ian Rotten. He's kind of the poster boy. And they started doing more shit because if one thing is good, 17 things are better. And they also got in the business at the same era, the same time, where responsible, experienced promoters quit running, and it became either the mega companies or the hey kids, let's put on a show crowd, and they would be allowed to do this shit. And then now the guys running the shows are from that same generation, so they think it's okay to begin with, and you have a bunch of people that are being allowed to do stupid shit to each other and themselves with no regard for whether it's good for the business or not, and nobody to tell them shut up, because responsible, professional, veteran, experienced talent generally doesn't dignify themselves to be involved in shows like that until one of them gets so broke they got to get a job and then they throw their fucking principles away. So that's what we have. And you know what, Brian? I just hate it. I hate it when these people start impersonating wrestlers. I wish there was some way that we could hold them legally accountable for impersonating wrestlers and for impersonating a professional sport. I wish there was some way.
Well, Jim, some kids are born to parents on opioids.
You just had to use that same one. Oh. You just had to use the same one. All right. Well, folks, and I love him now more than ever because he not only can handle himself legally, as they say, in every situation, but also he has a wonderful social circle of qualified attorneys that can handle every kind of matter all over the country. And he's just put me on one in Potah, Oklahoma. And I'm talking about Stephen P. New and the law offices of Stephen P. New at newlawoffice.com. 1-88. You don't have to do the 180 anymore. Just 888.
No. Yes.
692-8084. No wonder I can't ever get him. I'm still putting the one in. But I'm telling you, folks, and if I'm lying, I'm flying and my feet ain't left the ground. If you got a problem with somebody, if you have been screwed over, cheated, harmed in some kind of way by a big major corporation or somebody that needs to be held accountable, Stephen P. New is the man for you. If you need to get even, call Stephen. If you need to sue, call Stephen P. New. I've said this many times on MLW programming. And I mean, he's into everything from the diabetes drug Invokana that has caused people to develop genital gangrene to the opioid-born babies born to parents who are addicted to opioids, especially in West Virginia, but all across the country because of we're seeing it every day in the news now. The big pharma companies.
Can you imagine if you're born addicted to opioids and your parents' gardener uses Roundup?
And if they were diabetic, you could have cancer, genital gangrene, and be born addicted to drugs all by the time you're a week old.
My God.
And you're seeing this. What have we been saying for the past 2 years now? Johnson & Johnson baby powder. And now you're seeing it in the news, and they were trying to cover it up. And the Roundup. Now you're seeing it in the news and trying to cover it up. You're seeing everything that we've been talking about here on the program in the news every day with these big companies because now they're out in the open with this fucking pig-faced, anus-lipped fuckwad in the White House with his criminal fucking family and his stooge fucking enablers with limp dicks and spines like fucking jelly. All the big companies, they ain't going to do anything to us, at least not till 2020 when the sane people come back to the polls, so we got another year and a half we can fuck everybody. Well, no. Nuh-uh. Not to toot his horn, but toot. Stephen P. New is bringing you to justice, boys. So anyway, if there's anybody out there that needs some help, needs somebody to stand up for their rights, needs somebody to take their hand and lead them to the promised land of justice, it's Stephen P. New, newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084. He is the consigliere of the cult of Cornette, and he can handle your problems.
Well, can you handle these questions this week, Jim? That's the big question.
Well, now, which question would you like me to handle? The question of whether I can handle the questions or the actual questions themselves? I can't just be handling everything because I'm a germaphobe to begin with.
Well, I got one. Let's see if you can handle this one. It is really hot out, like you said earlier. It is boiling hot out. So let's get a hot question. This is from Steve.
Your segues need some polish this week.
I'm off, I guess. I started good and I just burned out right at the top.
You have dovetailed and you're in a spiral.
Oh my God.
Please, somebody get Sully to fly this fucking plane.
This was sent in the CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Steve Van Etten. I recently watched a clash from 1989 in Fort Bragg, and I couldn't help but notice that Bobby looked a little fleshier than normal. Did Jim ever have to address one of his charges' weight? If it was becoming an issue, and if so, how awkward were those conversations? Incidentally, that show also featured the debut of Jimmy Garvin as a Freebird, as well as the Ding Dongs and Ranger Ross battling the terrorist. Gotta love Jim Herd. And the reason I brought up the Heat before, Jim, because I think that may be the hottest wrestling show I've ever seen on TV, where it just looked like everyone was sweating their ass off.
The walls were actually dripping. The walls of here was the deal. And first of all, no, I never. Bobby had gotten a little fleshy there for a couple of reasons. Number one, that's the right after the period where we had taken for the first time in. What was it? That was 1989. So for the first, for in Bobby's case, he had had the better part of 2 months off the wrestling business for the first time in 12 years. because we had taken time off from WCW when George Scott was booking, and then we had come back, and that was one of our first shows back. And also he had the knee issue, which is one of the reasons why we were happy to have the time off. And he had gotten a little fleshy anyway. And also there was a motivational factor at some points in WCW, but he ended up going on his own diet and dropping some weight down because it made his knees feel better. And once he got started working again, obviously some of it came off anyway. So no, Bobby at one point in the WCW years did get a little fleshy, but he was still doing everything he always did. It was harder on his body. So, but as far as the Clash being hot, it was at the Army base at Fort Bragg, right? Or was it I guess it's the Army.
I think so.
Or is it the Marines?
Maybe the Marines.
It ain't the Navy. I don't know. It's Fort Bragg. And the deal was it was like a field house, and it was not air conditioned at all. And they're doing national TV from there on TBS with those hot lights, and the admission was free to everybody on the base. So the place was jam fucking packed, which is what they wanted. And they couldn't draw a house like that, any other way in those days. But as a result, it was literally like 125, 130 degrees in the building. I mean, it was fucking, and this is how hot it was that I could believably do this. Well, first, that was the night, I think on our first match, I'm doing the introduction. We're baby faces, remember, right? At that point in time, we have come back as baby faces. I'm doing the introduction to the Midnight Express for the match with the Freebirds, and a drunk fucking soldier jumps up and tries to jump into the ring, but he fucking hung himself on the top rope and flipped over and just landed in a fucking heap.
That's right.
And the other soldiers came and grabbed him, and I said, yeah, sleep it off, you fucking drunk. I switched heel again, or whatever the fuck. But anyway, everybody laughed at him. Then the Midnight's wrestling the Freebirds. It's the World Tag Team Title Tournament, either semifinals or finals, whatever. And that's when Paul E. came out and hit me with his own loaded tennis racket that he knocks me out somewhere or another. The Freebirds win the match. And then they open the cover and reveal that his racket was really loaded. And mine was never revealed, but his was opened and revealed it had chains and all this other stuff in it. And to sell the thing, they had the EMTs at the building, the Army EMTs or whatever, because I've been knocked out, and they have them go carry me out, right? Well, they carry me all the way out the back door, and my God, it was the middle of summer, and it was like 30 degrees cooler outside. It was only like 90. So as they take me out and they lay me there, now I'm selling, and I thought they were going to take me to the locker room, but instead they're treating me like I've legitimately been knocked out. They're doing the fucking, let me see your eyes and shining the light, and they're taking my blood pressure, and they're doing all this shit. And so I've got to go with this. So I'm saying everything got black, and it was so hot. I saw the sparkly things, and they wanted to transport me to the fucking hospital. And at that point, I give, who was it? One of the referees, maybe Pee Wee was there, but I give somebody the fucking Iggy, the office on the wrist, right? Get me out of here. And they said, look, let's take him back to where he can change out of these hot clothes, and then we'll evaluate. And they got me back to the locker room. But they were going to take me to the fucking hospital because I was selling being knocked out by a loaded tennis racket. But it was so hot, it was believable, because I was already fucking blowed up to begin with.
So that was your first night back.
No, the first night was at Center Stage, I remember. And then we got in the tag team title tournament, and that was the first Clash back. It was like the same week or whatever.
Whatever optimism you may have had during that time off, where you're just working Continental and eating food, was it met when you got back, or did you instantly think, oh boy, there's still going to be a problem with this company, even with the change in management?
Well, no, we didn't have any optimism at that point anyway, because we had already had the discussions with Jim Hurd over our contracts and saw where the fuck he was at. And then I was looking at, Ranger Ross, there was a reason to experiment with Ranger Ross because he was a legitimate service veteran. He'd been, somebody said he was a parachute jumper. what do they call the aerial parachute people in the service? Whatever. He did that in the war in Grenada, right? But somebody on the fucking wrestling show said, yeah, they dropped him into Grenada dropped him out of a plane into Grenada or something. Anyway, he was a good looking guy and he was a good athlete and he had wrestled locally, but he wasn't getting over. He was just too nice and bland. And they had him against Ranger Ross versus the terrorist at Fort Bragg, so he'd get a pop, right? But the ding-dongs and Herd's sticking this other shit in. And so we didn't really have any optimism coming back, except that we figured, well, in this fucking field, it won't be hard to get over again. And we're already over to begin with, and they've had a break from us. How can we miss you if you won't go away? But what we didn't realize was the lengths and the depths of which Herd would go to bury us. The time I got optimistic was when Flair said, fuck it, after the July bash, the 89 bash, and said, I want to be the head booker instead of this committee, and I want to determine the direction. And that's when I got optimistic. And then he asked me to be on the committee, and working with him and Kevin and seeing the ratings go up and the numbers go up. We couldn't do anything about the house shows because we couldn't go out and poster each one of them individually. But the TV ratings, pay-per-views went up. The match quality went up. The talent quality that was being used went up. He wanted to push Pillman. He wanted to push the Steiners. He wanted, I got optimistic there and even though I was seeing Herd every fucking week at that point, which kept me from really being optimistic, the product was better and the numbers were better. But then when he quit, that's when in February, I pretty much gave up and zoned out for the rest of the year. I just worried about our shit and I didn't care what the fuck they did.
It's interesting. On the most recent episode of John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight Then and Now, another fine show on the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network, June 4th, 1989.
Trademark.
Yeah, that's right. June 4th, 89. And there are two callers. It makes me think of this. One of them was saying how, we all love the NWA right now, but the diehards can't sustain a wrestling company. You need a mainstream audience. And another caller called up and said, look, I love the NWA, but they're starting to copy the WWF too much. They're starting to take little things from the WWF. And he starts mentioning like little skits with doctors and different things. And it's just interesting because, looking back, so many people look at 1989 literally as the glory days. Not just the name of the Great American Bash pay-per-view, but they see the summer of 89 into the fall of 89. I guess really up until February of 90, like right around there is the cutoff.
Imagine that.
So knowing that that period of time is held in such high regard, what do you think of that? Do you understand it? Do you see it the same way? Are you overly critical of it because you were both involved as talent and then later as part of, dare I say, management on the booking committee? What do you think when you look at, let's say, from May of 89 until February of 90. So before you were on the committee and then your time on the committee.
Well, yeah, no, what both those people said was correct because you can't sustain, which is what I'm telling all elite wrestling, you can't sustain a company with just the diehards. And unfortunately, over the previous 6 to 9 months, really, that's all. After that, that's all that they had left in the summer of 89 was the diehard WCW fans that were hoping it was going to get better. But I mean, look at I just did an article on the Great American Bash for the dearly departed Fighting Spirit magazine, folks. They're going to be collector's items because the last issue is coming out next month. But the 86 Great American Bash in Greensboro did fucking 15,000 people. In 87, pretty much the same. In 88, I think it was maybe in 12,000. In 89, 1,500. Charlotte. Amazing. In 85, 27,000. In 86, 23,000. In 87, 15,000 because they were starting to do bashes in all the towns in North Carolina. So, of course, it was going to go down somewhat. But the Charlotte bash in 89, it did fucking less than 3,000. All the house shows had fallen in a hole because of the rotten TV tapings in major markets. They disrupted the schedule. They got new people booking the events and the buildings on the wrong days and the wrong towns. The syndicated TV, just everything fell apart very quickly. So, yes, I agree. You know, that's all they had left was the diehards, but they also what got the numbers back up the second half of the year was Flair relying on good quality talent and angles that people could get into and trying to eliminate the fucking ding dong bullshit and the fucking, goofy WWE light bullshit that Herd wanted to do. Well, to get the kids. Remember, he's the one that wanted to, if they could find a one-legged wrestler, they could have Long John Silver because they owned the rights to the fucking movie Treasure Island. Yeah. But the pay-per-views came up. The TV ratings were the best TBS ratings from the time they bought the company until 1995 or 6 under Flair. And so people remember that fondly because they remember that they watched the TV shows and they've got the pay-per-views now on the network. They don't realize that actually business-wise, the only year worse than 1989 for business in WCW was 1990. And the only year worse than 1990 was 91. By 92, they weren't even fucking running house shows a lot. And Smoky Mountain Wrestling in 1994, we ran the Cobb Civic Center in Marietta and drew a bigger crowd than WCW often had running the Omni till they quit running it. It just, they never got a chance to get started because all Herd wanted to do was copy Vince because he figured, well, since I don't know anything about wrestling, this guy's a success, so I'm going to copy this. He didn't understand that the reason why WCW had a loyal, diehard audience, many of whom had been driven away, is because it was the exact opposite of the cartoon bullshit WWF. We had blood and violence and realism and fights and shit that Dusty did that made people fucking want to choke somebody. But it worked because it was all about fucking everything. Everything is fucking life and death. And the WCW, the NWA fans like that. WCW washed all the fucking grease and grime off of it. And it was just bullshit.
This period of time is 30 years ago, and I guess probably for that reason it's been covered on a few of my shows. John McAdams' show, Stick to Wrestling, just did a segment where he talked about being in the bathroom, I believe at the hotel, after an NWA show, or after a WWF show in Boston, and a few wrestlers, and I won't say who, but I know who, came up to him, right behind him, and said, "What do you know about Dusty coming here?" So I mean, they were thinking about that. And on John Arezzi's show, we're listening to, again, June 4th, 89 right now is what we're up to this week. And there's a lot of callers saying this is right when Dusty went in and Wyndham went in too. And the rumors everyone was saying was this opens the door for Mike Rotunda to return to the WWF. And this is right when the Varsity Club broke up, even though he was a heel for a little while longer. Was that a rumor in the locker room in the NWA that Mike Rotunda would jump to the WWF when Wyndham and Dusty showed up there?
No, because he was under contract. So he couldn't have if he wanted to unless he'd asked. But see, that's what people, and I guarantee you a bunch of people were shitting in the WWF, Dusty coming here, because the best thing they could have done, they could have counter-programmed and won that thing a whole lot quicker. Since WCW had become the, fucking land of Herd and the ding-dongs and the hunchbacks, despite everything that Flair and everybody else could do, and that's why Flair quit, because Herd wouldn't leave him alone. They should have given Dusty the book, and they should have started doing fucking juice and bull rope in the WWF. They would have flipped the fucking thing and won. They would have kicked WCW's ass in 6 months. That's what they should have done.
I think the quote was, "We came here to get away from him."
Well, anybody that ever went anywhere to get away from Dusty Rhodes couldn't fucking hang and didn't know how to draw money.
Wow. All right.
Because everybody that stuck with Dusty Rhodes drew nothing but money and made nothing but money.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Joe in Boston. And he sent this in just under 2 weeks ago, 11 days ago, as we are recording. 35 years ago yesterday was Black Saturday.
Oh, my God.
Can Jim share his memories of how he first heard about it? What was his reaction? And where did he think it would take the business?
Well, I first heard about it when it happened and we were in Mid-South, so obviously I wasn't watching the television. I was in a car in a locker room somewhere, whatever the fuck, but I was mortified because this was obviously not fucking good. Not only to lose one of the great wrestling shows, but for the NWA to lose that exposure. For the Atlanta office, we didn't know at the time that Crockett was going to end up, owning the whole thing. So we're like, oh my God, Georgia Championship Wrestling is fucked. And, we looked, at least me and Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey in the fucking car, we liked some of the guys that were in New York, but we looked at that shit and was like, we hope this does not spread. Because Vince was already getting goofy. It wasn't as goofy as it would get, but it was already getting goofy. But yeah, no, it was not good. Not good. But then when we heard the next spring, when we were in Dallas, that Crockett had bought the time slot, and we knew we had a standing offer to go to work for Jim Crockett whenever we were finished in Dallas. And that's about the same time, I swear to God, as we got that Texas Stadium payoff, $1,150 fucking piece, I believe it was, whatever the fuck, and said, fuck it. And we called Jimmy Crockett. So it was great a year later, but it was bad news to hear in 1984.
JYD would jump a few weeks later after, again, Bobby Fulton said on 605, he was saying, we got to get ready for the war. We got to get ready for Vince. And then he jumped to Vince.
Yeah.
Were there rumors in the locker room, in the heel locker room? Because Mid-South, of course, had two different locker rooms. In the heel locker room, were there rumors about guys in the other locker room or anyone you were in there with being the next guy, being someone who's going to jump? Because it seemed like so many guys, one after another, some even for just short periods of time, like Buzz Sawyer, were jumping up to the WWF.
Well, Buzz was not in Mid-South at that time. So,
right.
Yeah. But, well, just to clarify, I'm trying to think, I don't remember because anybody specifically being rumored to be next because everybody was kind of offended. Of course, we were in the heel locker room, but sometimes every once in a while there was a building where everybody was together and could be together without the building. See, that was the thing. You got to understand, we weren't just in separate locker rooms because the fans could see that we were in separate rooms. We weren't allowed to be in the same locker room, unless the building people could be prevented from seeing that we were both in the same locker room, even the building staff. So it had to be that fucking strict. But there was still a few buildings where you could be back and forth, and everybody was hot at dog for bailing on us, right? And at least that's what they were saying publicly. Nobody was admitting it. Of course, what I'm trying to think, I think it was Jake. Jake may have been the one when he went, they called his fucking house and the answering machine was dun 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 dun, start spreading the news. Which I tend to believe because when I couldn't find him, when he fucking bailed and no-showed on me as a Smoky Mountain champion, I called his fucking house and his answering machine said, I have become comfortably numb.
So Jay communicates through his answering machine.
Yes. And better than he did verbally, since you couldn't find him.
Well, our next question, Jim, was sent in via email, thecornydrivetthru@gmail.com from Dominic. My name is Dominic from Halifax, Nova Scotia.
I've heard that rumor.
My question is, what are your thoughts on the horrible, terrible, absolutely dreadful WWF talk show Tuesday Night Titans, hosted by Vince McMahon? Obviously, Dominic has his own very strong thoughts on this.
That's what I was talking about. As soon as I saw that shit, I'm like, oh my fucking God. That's when I realized that we were really it was a war for fucking wrestling because, everybody says, oh, I love the people on Twitter also. I say, well, you hate All Elite, or you hate all this modern wrestling, so keep watching your WWE. Like I've really been in love with them either. Even when I was there and part of it, I was sometimes embarrassed. But no, it was the fucking boys are funny At least a lot of them back then were, when the guys still had personalities, because they'd came up from the territories and they'd been in locker rooms, not playing video games on the goddamn internet and fucking not speaking to anybody. But anyway, I digress. And that would have been funny shit if it was in the locker room. But it was making the business silly even then, which is where Vince was going, as we all know. And so I hated it from the start. And I thought it was bad. The same thing with Glow. I'm sorry, everybody. No, Glow is such a hit. No, Glow was a parody in the 80s of wrestling, and it was embarrassing, and everybody couldn't. When I would say to the boys, oh God, they got that fucking Glow on in Charlotte now, this is not going to be good for business, they'd say, it's fucking girls and it's not the same thing. No, the thing is, some of the moves, a few of them looked as good as what the guys were doing on the NWA program. And how can one thing be legit and the other thing be a parody when they look so fucking close? I knew that was bad. And I hated it when Vince started doing the Tuesday Night Titan shit and all the funny skits and everything, because that was showing in Charlotte. That was showing in Greensboro. That was showing in Mid-South. That was showing wherever we were trying to do the real shit. And I knew it wouldn't be good. From the start, when I was 23 years old, I was able to discern this because I had the ability of cognitive function. And as history has shown, it wasn't good. It kept going further and further and further until the people that grew up thinking that was the good shit are in charge. And then it's gone further and further. This is what has happened. It started 35 years ago with Vince. People have run off and passed him since then in the silly scale. But it started there. It had never been done or allowed before in the business. And I've been telling people for 35 years where it was going to end up. And all of my prophecies have come true.
All right. Well,
so there you have it.
Well, let's see if you can keep this prophetic streak going. Our next question, Jim, sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Sober Wrestling.
Sober Wrestling.
Sober Wrestling. If you were named president of AEW and you could pick any 5 wrestlers in the world today besides MJF to be the cornerstones of your company, who would you pick and why? They could be from WWE or any company.
Well, 5 is an odd number. You either need 4 or 6. But
6.
Okay, I see. You always want more. Once again, you can't just make a company instantly successful by putting together your dream roster. And also, as I've mentioned before, if you said, Cornette, take the 20 best wrestlers in the world and start a company, I'd say, no, give me the 10 best in the world and 10 for them to beat, and then I'll hold the other 10 back to bring them in later on so I got somewhere to go. But I think Mike Johnson or Dave Scherer, one or the other, maybe both, wrote a heck of a piece on PW Insider where they said the one piece of advice they'd give Tony Khan, however much money you got to give him, sign CM Punk. And I don't care if they have to have stars to make stars. And right now they got Chris Jericho as a name. And then they have these other sub-niche genre fanboy darlings, but they don't have anybody that the average fucking guy at the bar or the average fucking person at the mall or whatever has seen, heard of, etc. Besides Jericho. So they need Jericho. They should sign CM Punk, however many millions of dollars it took, because imagine that. I'm not even talking about it that he's the greatest wrestling talent in the history of the world. I'm saying he's over and people still think about him and they still recognize him. And he could be a huge benefit to getting publicity and getting some of those disenfranchised WWE fans back. I would also concentrate on having 1 or 2 top singles guys that Jericho and CM Punk could eventually make. And there's nothing wrong with Adam Page if they want that to be one of those guys, but I would have somebody else with a completely different look not including MJF, but somebody that's a badass. I'm just hearing this question for the first time, so I'd have to search, but I'd also have a great tag team, whether it be the Briscoes or the Revival. I would also, as a matter of fact, I would probably, in some cases, if I had the billionaire's money, instead of trying to make all these fucking cosplay wrestler stars from the word go, I'd just buy a few guys out of existing contracts with anybody but Vince, because you can't tell me any other wrestling promotion wouldn't want a large influx of cash for almost anybody on their roster except, the guy they've hung their hat on. So I'm sure that some things would be negotiable. But at this point, it's not really about getting names that could have great matches and could be a great roster for an established promotion. It's about getting who can get you the most attention and sell you the most tickets right off the bat with people that are not already going to watch whatever you do because they love the Young Bucks. All those people who don't give a shit and have already given up on wrestling because they thought it went away. But if they hear or see a familiar name that can still go, they might give it a chance. That's just me.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Peter Boyle. Does Jim have any stories or interactions with Sabu? In the stories I've heard about him recently, he comes off as an absolute grade A asshole.
I've never had any issue with Sabu. He's crazy. I think everybody knows. I think Sabu knows Sabu's crazy. The Super Genie actually spent a long time living here in Louisville and trained here at OVW, and she's a very nice lady. But yeah, Sabu is as fucking as crazy as a rainbow trout in a car wash, as they say. The only thing I can say is that I used to say, why is he mad at the tables when he started the whole breaking the table thing? And it wasn't even somebody on the table. He was just going through the table himself. It was the same thing as I was saying with Luchasaurus. When he was in the Battle Royal, he was a goofy fucking gimmick. When he stands alone in the ring with normal looking human beings, he's a fucking great gimmick. Sabu, even though he did all that shit when he was the only one doing it, at least he was a gimmick, and that's what you knew you were going to get. But then when everybody else that grew up as fans of his and were allowed to just do this willy-nilly, I understand now. There are shows that are run, and I know some independent wrestlers listen to this program, so I'm sure they can vouch for this. There are shows where when these guys do the invisible, like forces with you choke slam where they don't touch each other, or they break into the dance routines, or they do the invisible fucking man spot or the hand grenade or whatever, they don't even ask permission from whoever's booking or the promoter. They just go out and do it in their match. I've heard now that is so far that now that's...
Yeah, that's the same as them doing an arm drag. You don't ask for permission. You just do it.
I'll tell you what, I wouldn't have asked for permission to hit the ring with a fucking baseball bat or a kendo stick and just walk the dog on any motherfucker that did that on my show. I almost I left one time an OVW show when Seven was fucking around and wearing a fucking hat in the dark match at the TV taping. I said, I'm going to leave now so I don't bash his brains in with a baseball bat. Tell him I said that when he comes back, and if I ever see him wearing a fucking hat again and taking this fucking match as a joke instead of seriously, when he ain't good enough to do that yet, I'll fucking run over him with my car. Can you believe he complained about that to the office?
I am shocked.
Because he wasn't in the wrestling business then. He was trying to be a sports entertainer. People who are in the wrestling business don't complain about shit that people are saying to them to try to make them better. But anyway, I digress. Where were we going with that?
I have no earthly idea.
What was the question that was asked?
Sabu! Any stories about Sabu?
Oh, Sabu. No, I've never actually worked around him very much. I've seen him at many conventions and appearances, and I've never had any problems. But no, but that's the thing is when he was the only guy flipping through furniture and doing all this death-defying stuff, At least that was a gimmick. It was like the Sheik's gimmick. But when everybody started doing it, then, now he's broke his body down and, for no reason.
We got a few questions about Great American Bash 1986 because it's just gone up on the WWE Network. This first one was sent in to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from lovely Lance Lumley, Columbiana, Ohio. Recently, the WWE Network posted the July 5th, 1986 Great American Bash card from Charlotte. Besides the first 3 matches, Denny Brown versus Steve Regal, Robert Gibson versus Black Bart, and the Andersons versus Nelson Royal and Sam Houston.
And by the way, the Robert was at a single because that was Ricky was in the main event against Flair for the title. That's at the height of Rock and Roll Express mania, and Ricky's the one Flair wanted to work with. So,
besides those 3 matches, every match on the card had a stipulation and blood. For instance, the card included the Midnights and Jim versus Dusty Magnum and Baby Doll in a cage, Flair versus Morton in a cage, Indian strap match, hair versus hair match, bunkhouse match, taped fist match, and others. Looking back, do you think this was too many gimmicks for one card or not? What about all but 3 matches having blood in it? Would it be better to spread out some of these throughout the tour?
But if you spread it out, see, this is the fucking thing. If you spread it out throughout the tour, nobody would see it except the people in that specific town. There wasn't streaming. There was no video cassette going to be sold of one show. I think they sold one video cassette of, I think it was the Charlotte show, as a matter of fact. There was probably a little too much juice, especially in Philly, but those people always love blood. But there weren't too many stipulations because that was the whole idea. It was the Eddie Graham package show. It was the Bill Watts package show that he learned from Eddie Graham, but it was the Dusty Rhodes package show. So it was on the sauce a little bit more because Dusty was an over-the-top guy. But those were programs that had been building. A normal show in Raleigh might have a title match and a stipulation match and a grudge match and 4 other matches. But that wasn't a normal show. That was the Great American Bash. All the angles and the programs were to peak for the big blow-off show in the stadium. That's why the Great American Bash 89, the pay-per-view that everybody remembers, that I reviewed it for Fighting Spirit. They remember it because Flair versus Funk was off the charts, because Steamboat and Luger was fucking great, because there was a couple of other things that was pretty good, because me and Paul Lee exceeded expectations. But there was also a 10-minute or more Dynamic Dudes and Skyscrapers match. It's one of the worst matches I've ever seen and was an abomination. There was a meaningless battle royal. There was Brian Pillman wrestled Bill Irwin, and it went way too long just so Irwin could slip Pillman over in a preliminary, because it was a different booking committee than Dusty in charge of the Great American Bash. Dusty's Great American Bashes were blow-off matches in a cage, or Ric Flair versus Ricky Morton for the NWA title, or the Indian strap match with Wahoo and whoever. And they were short because everybody was on the card. There were 10 matches, and we didn't have 3-hour-plus shows in those days. The guys were already in the car fucking 8-10 hours a fucking day, or in a plane with the Great American Bashes, and working either every day or multiple times a day on weekends. So they couldn't go out there and do 30 minutes every fucking night. Didn't need to. The bell rang for the bashes at 7:30, and by 10:30, even with the intermission and the musical fucking accompaniment, you were fucking out of there, and you'd seen 10 matches, and they were all action and all wild and all fucking violent, and everybody got cheers and boos and blah, blah, blah. And then that's why the Great American Bash was in the summer, because the fall is always a rebuilding period, because the kids go back to school. September was a suck-ass month everywhere down south. Kids go back to school. That's when you start changing your programs up, and you put so-and-so against such and such because you just had their blow-off. So they got to have new opponents. And you start building some things up, and you start leading into your fucking winter season that hopefully will be good with Thanksgiving and Christmas and etc. So no. The matches needed to be short, wild, and exciting. Get them all in. And there were 23,000 people in the fucking building at that Great American Bash in Charlotte. So I don't think they thought it was too much. If every show in Charlotte had been like that, Crockett wouldn't have stayed in business 6 months. But every show wasn't.
Jim, our next question was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Don Rio. WWE recently released the full cards from Greensboro and Charlotte during the 1986 Great American Bash. I enjoyed it immensely, especially the 6-person mixed cage matches featuring Jim and the Midnight Express. My question is, were those 2 matches the most money Jim and the Midnight Express made on a single house show while working for Jim Crockett Promotions? Also, I know Jim has done it with the 1987 and 1988 Great American Bashes, where he talked at length about the payouts from that tour, but could he go over the payouts from this tour as well, especially with how many stadium shows were involved? I don't know if you have to do that today, but it could be a future plan.
Well, no, we did an 86 Bash, didn't we? Certainly we did. How the fuck would we not have?
I thought we did. I'm going to check right now while you talk about the individual paydays for
while I vamp.
Greensboro and Charlotte.
Yeah, no, well, no and no are the answers. No, it wasn't the most money we got per match, and because no, we didn't actually get paid per match. The deal was in the 86 Bash that there were events every day of the week all month, as usual, in July of 86, but only 14 events were branded the Great American Bash on tour. Those were the big events at the stadiums or the big arenas, not the TV tapings or the regular house shows. So we did good business all through the month because the programs were peaking and everybody was, was watching the television. I at Greenville, South Carolina, did a $62,000 house at $10 tickets tops for a non-bash event that month, which I think was an all-time record. But we didn't get paid for the 14 bashes individually. We got a check at the end of the month for our bash pay, which was smart on Jimmy Crockett's part. They never did it again. The next year, they just paid individually. But all the boys were working their asses off thinking it's going to be like fucking 14 Starcade payoffs, right? Because that's what Flair had said. Boys, it's going to be like 14 Starcades. Well, the cost of the fucking buildings and all the transportation and all the goddamn publicity and all that stuff, we ended up for 14 bashes. Me and the Midnight got a check for $21,000. Was it? Wait a minute. Hold on. I'm going over to the wall. Be right back.
Mr. Cornette has now left his desk. He's going over to the wall, whatever that may be and whatever it may contain. We can only guess what he is right now grabbing and bringing back to his announce table, to this desk, this microphone that he sits at, where he broadcasts from. Jim, by the way, for the record, we have not covered the 1986 Great American Bash on the show.
Well, how the fuck? All right, well, we'll do that then. But anyway, we made $17,300 each, me and the Midnight Express, for the 14 bash dates, but we made just short of $24,000 for the entire month of July 1986. I think if you run that through the inflation-ator, that's probably about $60,000 in today's money. But anyway, I digress. The point is, we didn't get paid individually that year for those, but no, the most money that we ever made for Jim Crockett on one particular match was both Starrcade 86 and 87. We got $10,000 apiece. After that, I think it'd have to be Starrcade 85 where we got 5. And then there were great individual payoffs, but our big weeks for Crockett, because obviously all the weeks were different since we weren't on contract. They were paying us on the gates. Our big weeks for Crockett were, if we made $5,000, $6,000, that was considered a really good week. Of course, that was 30 years ago plus. So.
All right, well, we'll definitely take a deep dive at some point into the 86.
How have we not done that? How did we do 87 and 88 without doing 86?
We did 87, 88, 89, and 90.
Yeah, because 90 was just such a rib, right? We did it to illustrate that there was nobody in the fucking buildings.
Yeah, so we need to do 86 and also Starrcade 86. So there's something to look forward to for the Cult of Cornette for a future episode.
Oh, son of a gun. Why are you not keeping me up to date on these things we're not doing, Brian?
I'm sorry. I've been enjoying all this music from Rhino that I've been listening to on my Raycon headphones while dancing around suing people with Stephen Pinu.
Yeah, and by the way, at Raycon, at what is it, buyraycon.com, you get 20% off. We said 15% last week on the experience, and they're giving people 20%. So we got you an even better deal on those great earbuds.
Well, the actual address is buyraycon.com/JCE.
There you go.
You want to make sure you put the slash. A lot of people want to slash JCE. And let's go to our next question, Jim. This one came in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Albert Bettis. So far, AEW has presented very little that makes me want to tune in this fall. However, recently in a sit-down interview with Jim Ross, it was revealed that Tully Blanchard is now the manager of Shawn Spears. I'm curious what Jim's thoughts are for the potential of Tully as a manager.
Well, that's interesting, actually, because Tully was a great promo as a wrestler on his own. And I say a great promo because he wasn't out there over the top like Flair or Dusty, but he was believable. He spoke exactly like he would have if he, as a pro wrestler, was real, because it really was Tully, if that makes any sense. And he was very well spoken. He'd cut a promo and he'd get people fired up and he'd get heat on people. It's a different animal talking for someone else than doing it on your own. And as far as I know, Tully's never done it. But once again, this is not going to be the days of he's going to have to go out there 6 and 7 nights a week and be a manager at ringside, interfering and taking bumps and whatever. He's just got to talk. And he's so far above today's group of talent as far as speaking as yourself and meaning it, that he should do very well, in my opinion.
My prediction is Cody's going to announce that Arn's going to be in his corner. And then we get to the event and MJF's Cody's best friend. He comes out and everyone turns on Cody. Boom. Just like Dusty was booking it.
Copyright Dusty Rhodes, 1988.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, actually 85.
85 or 83 or yeah, but
yeah.
80. Actually, that would make me interested in everything. If fucking Tully and Arn were in opposite corners. And I don't know how it happens, but Cody Rhodes is the only person that I'm consistently interested in on any All Elite Wrestling program. Could it be that he's the only smart one? Possibly. I
just saw a match from AAA from the other night. It was him and MJF teaming up against two guys. And forgive me for not knowing the luchadors they were against, but I really didn't. I was watching to see what they were going to do. And it was great because MJF behind his back, he's like giving the fans the finger and stuff. And then as soon as Cody turns around, he's, taking pictures and thumbs up and good stuff. Good stuff there. But let's get a couple more questions in this week, Jim. This next one was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Doug Kaufman. I just finished watching some Memphis wrestling episodes on YouTube, and they showed the brawl in the Louisville Gardens, 1981. Mantell, Dream Machine, Lawler, Dundee, Jimmy Hart, etc.
Oh, my God, yes.
I have questions.
I have answers.
When the brawl leaves the ring and works its way towards the back, the floor seats and bleachers are empty in that area, and the fans are kept at a distance, still near ringside. The only visible people from the single camera are the wrestlers, security, a photographer, and a woman in a yellow dress. Question, I guess, A, Jim, are you the photographer?
Yes, I was.
B, who is the woman in the yellow dress? She's carrying something in her hand and follows the brawl towards the back, looking. No one is stopping her or holding her back. She's not involved in the fight, but she doesn't look like a fan.
And I'm trying to remember her last name. Was it June Johnson? She was the assistant manager of the Louisville Gardens. And if you will, now if you go back, by the way, this was the first 6-star match. This was the first match that Weasel Dooley and I both gave 6 stars to in 1981 because we had given 5 to Lawler and Funk because it was greater than anything that we had ever seen. And this actually beat that. And the live ambiance was incredible. The match, the reason for this whole deal was that the territory was undergoing a talent influx and outflux. And basically, for a month, the only talent that could do anything on the cards to carry the gates was Dutch Mantell, Jerry Lawler, the Dream Machine, Bill Dundee, Kevin Sullivan, Wayne Ferris, and the Nightmares, who at that time were Danny Davis and David Oswald. This was before Ken Wayne, and Jimmy Hart, the manager. Everybody else, it was just nothing happening. It was the early summer. So before they got the summer programs really cooking, they had about 4 weeks they had to do this to get by. So what they did was they had a match with Bill Dundee and the Dream Machine against Wayne Ferris and Kevin Sullivan with Jimmy Hart for the Southern Tag Team title. As they had fucking gone into the finish and Dundee's bleeding and they did some kind of DQ and Jimmy Hart gets in, they start getting heat on the baby faces. When they do that, suddenly here comes fucking Dutch Mantell and he hits the ring and he starts making a big comeback on the heels. But then here comes the Nightmares, Jimmy Hart's other team, and they shut Dutch down. And then here comes fucking Jerry Lawler and he makes a big comeback and then they shut him down. And they had been making comebacks and shutdowns all through the match anyway. So the people were up and down, up and down. Finally, all 9 of the guys are in the ring. They're all brawling. They spill out on the floor. And they go down the aisleway toward where the heel locker room was because the heels are trying to escape, right? And the baby faces are on them. But because, as you will see when you watch this, the cops, through the middle of the fight, the cops take one guy out. One cop has a full Nelson on him. The other one's carrying him by his legs, and they take him out because he had tried to jump one of the heels. The other cops are keeping the people back. Where they were smart was, when they go down the aisleway, the cops can kind of protect them. And then they got to the end of the ringside section. The far end of the general admission bleachers in the Louisville Gardens was always blocked off to people. That way the guys could come out and sit and watch the matches if they wanted. And also the people couldn't get anywhere close to where they could slip into the locker room. There was a stage, a portable stage, that there were graduations and different types of school shows and things that was at that end of the gardens also. And there were seats on risers in front of it from other events. And they just had that all blocked off. It was the complete end of the gardens. So the guys go down the aisleway in ringside, and then they start fighting in the empty seats on the risers. They start fighting in the empty section of the bleachers, and they start fighting on the stage that nothing is on because it's not that type of an event, where everybody in the building can see what they're doing and it's all out of control, but they're out of the actual fan area where the cops can keep control of everything. June Johnson was on her walkie-talkie, making sure that everybody was keeping an eye on the fans. The fucking fight's going on. The one guy that did try to get one of the boys, the cops snatched him and they carry him right through the middle of the thing without interrupting the fight, because all the security guys, Dean Hill was one of them, who did the OVW television show commentary for the past 25 years. He was one of the cops then. They knew not to interrupt the boys, but to make sure that the boys were unmolested. So up in the empty bleacher section, there's fucking Lawler chases Kevin Sullivan all the way up, and then Kevin pops him, and Lawler does the fucking deal where he takes the bump, ass over tea kettle, rolling all the way down the stairs. And somebody else gets thrown off the stage, and the partition that blocked all this off had sandbags on it, so they're throwing the sandbags at each other. But they'd already been in the ring for fucking half an hour by the time the whole thing was over with, and it was the goddamnedest fight you've ever seen in person, and the people were going absolutely berserk, and that's what qualified, in mine and Weasel's mind, as a 6-star match. If it was wilder as an exhibition than anything you'd ever seen before, and it got over with the people, and they were fucking throwing the babies in the air, that's 6 stars. And then what they did, they taped that angle and showed it on the Memphis show, and then it came back to Louisville, Lexington, Nashville, Evansville, etc. And for a month, they did 8-man tags. The next week was an 8-man tag. Then the next week was an 8-man tag, 2 out of 3 falls. Then an 8-man tag, no time limit, no disqualification. Because the 2 out of 3 fall 8-man was the first 6.5-star match. Because the heels came into the ring, the baby faces came in hot, jump started it, never settled it down. The baby faces were disqualified in the first fall. The heels were disqualified in the second fall. The baby faces were disqualified in the third fall, and they had a 10-minute fight after that. They'd been out there 40 fucking minutes. It is fucking crazy. And the way that Dundee fucking was so creative in these type of things, and Lawler was always figuring out a new way to get something out of something, whether it be a bump or a thing he could do or something that was different. And the heels had so much heat, Jimmy Hart specifically, that they never tired of seeing him get beat up. Because on those cards, they would have 3 preliminary matches, 2 single matches and maybe an underneath tag match, and then do that 8-man. You hadn't seen shit all night, but the people had paid $6, got their money's worth by seeing that 45-minute 8-man tag fucking chaos. And that got them through a month until they had the new talent in. They had pulled the trigger on other angles, and they were ready to do big business over the summer. It was creative booking.
That second Louisville match isn't on tape?
Oh, no, they didn't. There's one. I probably am the only person that has it. There's one 8-man tag from Lexington that they showed on the Tupelo and Jackson TV shows that I have on tape because Danny Davis taped it for me because he lived in Jackson. And otherwise, I don't think any of those 8-mans were ever even taped. They were house show matches. The only place they usually taped, unless it was an angle, was Memphis, because they would tape the matches at the Coliseum and air them in Tupelo and Jackson. But every once in a while, they did a show in Lexington, and that's the one that came from. I've never seen the one from Memphis.
And actually, the third part of Doug's question here, when the brawl goes into the upper rows of the seating of the arena, Lawler tumbles down the stairs.
Yeah.
The camera follows him down, and a cop navigates through the brawl on the floor, moving from left to right. Less than 30 seconds later, a number of police and security are carrying someone, not one of the wrestlers, through the brawl from right to left to the locker room area.
I've explained that. That wasn't actually going in the locker room. That's also the way you went to the back door, because they were going to toss him back out in the alley.
So, okay, that's the question. What was the story there? They would have tossed him back in the alley?
Yeah, unless he'd done something really egregious. Generally, they didn't take the time to arrest people. They just threw them out back in the alley and told them to get the fuck out of there before the wrestler they pissed off, came and beat the fuck out of them. But if they had done something that was arrest worthy, they'd have them fucking handcuffed and they'd take them back there was a giant room in the middle where I used to do my photography. I'd take the pictures. I'd set up the backdrop, like the colored drop cloth or whatever, in the middle, in between the door to the heel and the babyface locker room, so that each could come out, because they also wouldn't coexist when I was around, because I wasn't supposed to be smart. So that room there, it had good light and it had easy access to the locker room doors. That's where they'd also hold people that they were going to take over to jail, because the jail's 2 blocks up. The jail is on Liberty Street, by the way, which I always thought was ironic. But they would hold them there, so they were taking them in there. But then the dressing rooms were actually downstairs. So you came up, and then the heels went out the left side and babyface the right side. And there you have it.
All right. Well,
so that's where they were going. And that's also where, when the Wrestling Bear was in town, they'd wheel the Wrestling Bear in and keep him up there because they couldn't get him down the stairs to the locker room.
From there, Jim, let's get one last question here on the show. This one was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Matt Miller. On a recent episode of Steve Austin's podcast, Mark Henry told the story about Ahmed Johnson lacerating Ron Simmons' kidney and forcing him to be out for 9 months. Mark said that when Ron came back, his very first match was, ironically, against Ahmed, where he allegedly took him down and almost immediately broke 3 ribs and pretty much took him out of the business from there. Just wondering if you could elaborate on the story, or if you had any other great backstage Ron Simmons stories. He's always been talked about like a guy you would not want to mess with.
Well, I can't elaborate much on that because Mark pretty much told it. Yeah, Ron, and that's another thing about the 1989 Great American Bash. Guess who Ron Simmons was eliminated by in the Battle Royal?
Don't know.
Ranger Ross.
Ranger Ross, hey!
Yep. And as of how things changed in a short period of time.
How did that stick with you? How did that little...
Because I was so shocked. I just did this column a couple weeks ago, and I was so shocked at that when I watched it back after not having seen it for 30 years or whatever. But
he had the combat kick. He was cool.
Well, and he was dropped in a grenade out of an airplane. But anyway, but no, Ron Simmons, all the guys liked him from the start. They broke him in Florida in like 87. And you could tell he was going to be something. And he was kind of a prodigy, but he was a great athlete. And I mean, he was green for the first few years, but he grew into it quickly. And he was a man, and he was a stand-up guy. You didn't fuck him around. No, Ron Simmons was definitely, that whole APA thing was not a joke. You definitely did not want to be on the end of a Ron Simmons tongue lashing or fucking lesson in the ring.
It's been said he's the one guy the Steiners never messed with.
No. Well, and they respected him. It's not like they wanted to mess with him and were scared to. They didn't want to mess with him because they respected him and they liked him. But now I've seen him take, like, who was it? Ray Candy and Leroy Brown were the Commandos. Was it? I think it was, or was
the
it
Zambui Express?
The Zambui. No, but then later on they were the Commandos in 89 WCW.
No,
anyway,
Leroy Brown was dead by that point.
Well, then who was it? Ray Candy and,
I'm not sure.
Fuck, I can't remember. Another fat guy. Anyway, fucking Rick Steiner, for some reason, Ray Candy got on the wrong side of his nuts. And in every one of those battle royals, Rick Steiner would just take Ray Candy down in the middle of the ring and just tie him up and shit and just rub him around. And they also a couple times tried to do the same thing to Paul Lee, because the Steiners used to mess with Paul Lee bad. But anyway, now Ron, that's another guy that Flair immediately wanted to use and to push and to make more of. So he goes from the summer of 89, he gets eliminated in a battle royal by Ranger Ross, to by the fall he's there teamed up with Butch Reed, and that's why they brought Butch in, because Flair wanted a veteran working alongside Ron to kind of teach him timing and tag team stuff. But at the same time, Butch had knee injuries by that point and was not the stud, as JR would say, in the ring that he once was. So Ron could take up for that and made him Doom. And and from that point on, Ron had everybody's respect. That's why Watts wanted to make him champion. He was to somewhat, he was trying to recreate JYD, but at the same time, Ron was over and capable of getting over, and he could carry the thing, and he looked like a champion. He acted like a champion. So the only time I was not a fan of Ron Simmons was when he was the first incarnation of Farouk. I was there, and I hear Ron Simmons is coming to the WWF, and I'm on the creative team, and I'm all right. And then I hear from Vince, and I see the sketches from creative services that he was like a fucking Roman gladiator, but his name was Farouk. and it looked like he ought to be in a fucking chariot.
Farouk Assad.
Farouk Assad, but his outfit looked like he just stepped off the fucking set of Ben-Hur. And I'm like, what? Once again, what the fuck? Why do we have to change these people? But then, thankfully, that didn't got over like a fart in church. But as Vince started, okay, well, when all else fails, let people be more of themselves, a la Steve Austin. That's one thing. They were being edgier at that point than they were the previous year. So, okay, could Farouk be in the Nation of Domination and to be a takeoff on the Nation of Islam? Okay, at least that's more realistic. So let's do that. And then that's why the group was put together with Ron, and then poor Godfather, Kama Mustafa, the martial arts UFC fighter, had gone nowhere because he really wasn't. He's a tough guy and he trained, but he wasn't like Dan Severn. So, and they didn't understand what the UFC was anyway in the WWF, as illustrated by the Brawl for All. So that gave Godfather a place to go to become in a top group, and it gave D'Lo a break because, once again, D'Lo, the same function he served in the Gangstas with New Jack and Mustafa, because he was a good worker, but he wasn't the focus guy. You could beat him if you needed to beat the team, and you still didn't take any heat off the team. But primarily, I think they put Rocky in there at first because they were like, well, what the fuck else do we do? Because people have booed him out of the building because we tried to force him down their throats. But that gave him it not only gave him resources of people to talk to that had more experience to ask, but at the same time, it started giving him people to play off of when he started just saying, fuck it, I'm just going to do my shit instead of what they tried to get me to do. So the whole Nation of Domination, it was theoretically supposed to be Farouk's group to get Farouk over, but by the time it was finished, it had gotten The Rock over, which was fine too. But no, Ron's always been one of my favorite people.
I'll tell you what, Jim, one last question since you opened this door, and this question did just come in. This was sent into CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from John Slowinski in Swanton, Ohio. Recently, I got a chance to see a full match on the NWA's YouTube channel featuring Hacksaw Butch Reed defending the North American title against the Junkyard Dog in Houston. After seeing this match, it got me wondering if Jim had any knowledge or background info on Butch Reed. I'm curious as to why Reed's name is not generally brought up in the discussions about classic wrestling, like how JYD and even Ernie Ladd is often brought up, with distinction from many. This is kind of, I'm trying to make sense of this as it's written. Jim, let's talk a little bit about Hacksaw Butch Reed and why isn't his name brought up a lot today when for a few years there he was really on fire?
He was one of the best. Well, it's because of timing and time passing by and the timing of which he was on top. Butch Reed was a great babyface in the Florida territory, especially. You could tell Eddie Graham loved him. In what was it, 80, 81, 82, that period there. 82. He was a great babyface in the Florida territory. He had worked in a couple places down south. He was a great athlete. And then Watts gets him in Mid-South. And, of course, he's the kind of guy that Watts instantly wants to push because he had a football background, was a legitimate athlete, could cut a promo. Watts switches him heel there, and he was cutting great heel promos. And, I mean, when I got there, everybody Butch was one of the guys. Butch and Dog were really the two guys, and Duggan. There was a lot of great promos there now that I think about it. But all the boys wanted to sit down and hear what their promos were like. And then, fortunately, I got added to that mix. But, Butch would accuse JYD of selling wolf tickets. Selling wolf tickets is cutting a promo on a fucking match under false pretenses, right? You're crying wolf. Selling wolf tickets. This ain't going to be no big fight. Or talking out of both sides of your neck, like Ernie used to say. But his promos were great. He had that disdainful heel look, and he was having great matches. And they weren't smooth, scientific Ricky Steamboat classics he was having. He was having smash mouth fucking matches with Junkyard Dog and Hacksaw Duggan and the fucking, large guys of the Hercules Hernandezes and all those guys of the world in Mid-South Wrestling, which was fucking tough. And he was over. But then, what was it, by 85, that's when, didn't he leave there? Did he go somewhere before he went to Vince, or did he go straight to Vince?
I think at the end of 85, or maybe even the very beginning of 86, but I think the end of 85, because remember, he had the match with Flair on Mid-South TV in November of 85.
Yeah.
I believe he went to Kansas City, and then he went to Vince, but I think there may have been some reasons why he went home to Kansas City.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is I think there was some personal issues that took him home to Kansas City because that's where he was from. And then he went to work for Vince, and by then he'd had some knee injuries. He'd worked a hard style, and also they slowed him down tremendously. And they're not – the WWF in 1986 was not about to promote a ghetto street fight where this fucking guy was going to take his belt off and whip somebody and get juice on him and all that shit. So a lot of people remember they bleached him blonde like they did to Shelton Benjamin years later. And a lot of people remember that. And, and then unfortunately, except for a few WCW appearances in the early 90s, that was pretty much it on a mainstream basis for Butch. So it's just not enough people saw him and in the right place to remember him today, but he was fucking fantastic for a while there.
And I was a big fan of Doom, so let me ask you this. In the spring of 89, Butch Reed and Ron Simmons team up on some house shows. I don't remember if they did much TV, but definitely on house shows they were teaming up. And then they're not teaming up, and then the whole Robin Green turns into woman thing, and all of a sudden there's Ron Simmons and Butch Reed masked, but we were supposed to not know who they were, but it was pretty obvious who they were. were you part of the booking committee when Doom was developed? And also, was that the original intention for Nancy, for the Robin Green character, to be the manager of Doom? Or was she originally going to do something else?
Hold on, cowboy. You're giving way too much continuity to 1989 WCW. Ric Flair had seen Ron Simmons and Butch Reed team up at random on some of those shows because they just put them down as a team when, they were at probably George Scott when he was just booking. He just wrote names down. He didn't know who the guys were. He'd never seen us before. How's he know who the fucking guys are? Been there for 2 months. So he just wrote down a bunch of names. But Flair, I'm sure, had seen that. When Kevin Sullivan and Eddie Gilbert were part of the booking committee from, April until July, they obviously wanted to push the Steiners because they saw the talent there. And obviously, Kevin had a vested interest in having Nancy involved in something. Missy at one point had been with the Steiners there because Eddie had a vested interest in her. I'm not saying there's any nepotism going on here, but it was carried off well and people remember it. So if the performers are good, that's fine. But that was a summer booking committee idea that Robin Green, the fan of the Steiner fan, would turn into this fucking, she would become the fallen angel, but called woman, right? But when Flair got the book, he saw, what the fuck are we wasting Ron Simmons and Butch Reed for in preliminaries? These guys need to be a top tag team. He liked the name Doom, and I think he put the masks on them because they'd been featured in preliminaries. So let's not insult the people, even though you may know it's different, right? and to be quite honest, he said, and me and Kevin and both looked at him and said, my God, this is fucking fantastic. He said, can you imagine the visual, especially down south, of these two giant black men with this fucking the most beautiful, drop-dead, hot, sultry, gorgeous fucking white woman in the history of wrestling in these wild costumes? That looks like stars. Yes. And that'll get some heat. Yes. So that's where they went with that. And then, obviously, that segued into, on a more long-term basis, Teddy Long was with Doom. Because that fit even better, to be quite honest with you. And also because Teddy was doing good work at that point, and he had been with the Skyscrapers, who were the absolute worst fucking tag team that WCW ever signed because of Spivey's inability to do anything but try to work like Sid but not look like Sid. And they stunk every fucking match out they had. So, everything worked well in the end, but there wasn't any long-term plans longer than 3 months for all of 1989. Well, until when Flair got the book at the end of July. From then till the end of the year, all the plans went through as scheduled. But everything else before that was three different people. It was Jimmy Crockett as a placeholder at the start of the year until they hired George Scott. George Scott for about 3 months, booking committee for about 2.5 or 3 months, and then Flair. Which is why a lot of everything sucked.
But during that first run of the booking committee, you had Eddie Gilbert and you had Kevin Sullivan. They both have wives that they want, obviously, to be involved. Missy was already somewhat involved on TV. They had already started building up the Robin Green character there for Rick Steiner. Was she originally, because Doom wasn't already an idea, was she originally intended to be with Kevin because he was still feuding with Rick Steiner? Or was whatever, she was going to be opposite the Steiners, whatever that turned out to be. Now you're testing even my memory from 30 years ago. But yeah, it was originally going to be that she would turn on fucking the simple-minded Rick and become, and then, team with whoever the fuck that the Steiners were fucking with, or was fucking with the Steiners. But plans change, I hear. And then one last thing, because I'm so fascinated with this period of time. How much
I'm glad you are.
Everyone is. How much heat was there between the two camps, the Gilbert camp and the Sullivan camp? Because even though they coexisted, and at one point they were both on the booking committee, they both did have a wife they wanted to get into a good role. And despite how amazingly talented Missy was at this period of time, she didn't. I mean, it's kind of a way to waste Missy Hyatt, making her just a babyface manager holding a dog on a leash. And Nancy got that prime role, eventually ending up with Ric Flair. Was there a lot of, at that time, heat in the air between Kevin Sullivan and Eddie Gilbert?
Well, see, now here also remember, that we were gone from the first part of April until the first part of June. So I was just back, June and the rest of July until Flair started making changes. But obviously I talked to both guys. I never, and I've talked to Kevin a bunch. I mean, I was a lot closer to Kevin throughout history than I was to Eddie. He never knocked Eddie or had anything but respect for Eddie and what Eddie had done, either booking or working. Eddie never said anything to me publicly. I can't say that he didn't say anything privately, but I didn't ask him that deeply. They wanted Missy for what? Once again, Jim Hurd. I think they wanted Missy to be a baby face because she was doing the 800 number thing, which was still a deal at that point, and she was supposed to be doing interview segments or whatever. They were just trying to find a place to put her because unless you let Missy be Missy, it wasn't Missy. But they weren't letting Missy be Missy because the same reason Hurd didn't want me to be a manager at all. He wanted me to quit managing and become an announcer, and they could pay me more money. He was so fucking stupid. He was paying the announcers more money than the wrestlers, which was an idiocy. But that's where he was. I can pay you more money because you're an announcer and you do this, but not just a manager. So everybody was in a bad place in one way or another. To answer your question, I didn't see any obvious tension. Who knows? But and also at the time, Nancy she was so sweet. She didn't give a shit. She's like, just let me know what to do and she'll do it to the best of her ability and have fun.
With that, let's do this to the best of our ability and have fun. The drive-thru has closed. Well, thank you. Thanks, big boy.
You're welcome, my bigger boy.
I want to remind you that you can hear the Jim Cornette Experience when it debuts each and every Thursday, or listen whenever you like to the Experience or the Drive-Thru, wherever you find your favorite podcast, or, of course, on YouTube, tinyurl.com/official, corny YouTube, or just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette and see the official channel with amazing exclusive Travis Heckle artwork and all the videos, full episodes, as well as clips, omnibus specials, and much, much more. We have some really cool things coming at you in the weeks and months ahead. Subscribe now, tinyurl.com/official corny YouTube. You can follow Jim on Twitter at the Jim Cornette. You can follow me on Twitter at Great Brian Last. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com, or available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcasts for classic wrestling talk and wrestling humor. The 605 Superpodcast, the mothership. Of course, you can visit Cornette's Collectibles at jimcornette.com for t-shirts, burger towels, restraining orders, autograph photos, DVDs, books. What else is there? There's more.
Can you just hurry up? I gotta piss.
He's got to piss. JimCornette.com. Don't you piss. Be here next week for more of the drive-thru for Jim Cornette. I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally ho.
Hee-haw!